Hello, my American history students. This is week 3 of your distance learning, and this is going to be the first video lesson of week 3. Today we're going to be talking about the root of conflict pre-Civil War, and we're going to be talking about the issue of slavery. So this is going to be a lot of new information for you. We didn't get this far in our curriculum this year before break, so a lot of this is going to be new information for you, okay? So I want you to really listen and think about the topic that we're talking about. So let's get into just a recap of where the United States is at this time and place. So people who wanted to live in a democratic country founded the United States of America. They wanted a nation in which the people made decisions about who would lead the government and how the leaders would operate it. At the Constitutional Convention in 1787, delegates spent a great deal of time planning how the government of the United States would work best. Not everyone agreed, though. The Founding Fathers disagreed about the amount of power the federal government should have. Remember earlier we talked about the federal powers and the state powers, how they were different and how they were similar. The Constitution cleared matters up a bit. It explained how the rights and responsibilities of the federal government differ from those of state governments. Members of the Federalist Party supported the idea of a strong central government. Members of another political party, the Democratic Republicans, believed that states had the right to nullify, which means to cancel or declare invalid, federal laws they believed were unconstitutional. They thought this allowed the states the right to declare laws unacceptable. At the beginning of the 19th century, so the 1800s, many southern states believed the federal government was too involved in the state's business. They were especially concerned that the federal government might try to control slavery in the South. Southerners also accused the government of favoring the North. Tariffs, which are taxes on goods imported and exported from the United States, helped Northern manufacturing economy. Southerners felt the federal government was forgetting them. As time went on, great differences were seen between the North and the South. The economies of the two were different. The North made money in industry, while the South benefited from an agricultural economy. Most of the population in the North lived in large cities. Remember, we talked about the Industrial Revolution and everyone moving up to the North to do work in factories. The people in the South mostly lived on farms or in small towns. Many people in the North supported a strong federal government, while most Southerners believed each state should have the right to make certain decisions for itself. The differences became more noticeable as the century went on. Soon it seemed there could be no peaceful agreement or compromise between the North and the South. Would the disagreements lead to war? Spoiler alert, it does. All right, so we're going to talk specifically about two different compromises that were brought up during this time to fix the problem of the South succeeding and breaking apart. So we're going to talk about the Missouri Compromise of 1820. We're going to talk about the Compromise of 1850 and the KansasNebraska Act. And your assignment for this week is going to be an attached PDF where you're going to have to fill out 2 pieces of important information about each of those compromises. Okay, so listen really closely, especially to this part of the video, so you can fill out your assignment. So let's start off with the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The United States was still a young nation when President Thomas Jefferson approved the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The land purchased from France and Napoleon, remember we talk about this a lot, almost doubled the size of the country and included the Missouri Territory. In 1819, the Missouri Territory asked to become a new state. Immediately, people became concerned. Why would they be concerned when an area wanted to become a new state? Well, you have to decide if it's going to allow slavery in the state or if it's going to be a free state. Missouri's state constitution allowed slavery. If it were to be admitted as a state, there would be 12 slave states and 11 free states. A free state was one in which slavery was not allowed. If Missouri became a new state, the balance of the United States Congress would lean towards the South and slavery. People in the North were afraid of what might happen to the country if the slave states had more power than the free states. There were many debates in Congress about what to do with Missouri. Many people feared the United States might break apart. Then, a senator from Kentucky named Henry Clay suggested a compromise. The situation could be settled if both sides gave up some of their demands and met in the middle. So, his plan involved Missouri allowing to join the US as a slave state. At the time, Maine would also be admitted as a free state, so it would balance out one slave state and one free state. The number of free states and slave states would then remain equal. Clay's plan also included an imaginary borderline across the United States at the western point. Missouri's southern boundary. Slavery therefore wouldn't be allowed north of this line except in Missouri. Okay? Clay's plan became known as the Missouri Compromise. The new plan began to make the people in the United States feel better, and it gave them hope that the problems with slavery could be solved for good without having to go to war. However, some Southerners were still concerned that Northerners might one day try to change the way they lived. For the next 30 years, it seemed that the compromise had worked. But then we have, at the end of the Mexican-American War, the United States now gained a large amount of land from Mexico. So we have the land from France. Now we have land from Mexico in the west and the southwest regions. California was part of this land. In 1849, California asked to be admitted to the United States as a free state. Okay, so this is the Compromise of 1850. So we're going to listen for some details about what that was. So once again, it was clear that a compromise would have to be reached again. By this time, 15 states were free and 15 were slave states, so it's even still. Adding California would give more power to the North in Congress if it was a free state. In addition, much of California's land was below that border on the Missouri Compromise line. Remember that slavery was allowed south of that line. So some Southerners began to think about withdrawing their states from the Union if California joined as a free state, because technically California would be on that southern border below Missouri where there would be slave states. Senator Clay from Kentucky came up with a way to settle the differences. Again, so we see Henry Clay coming up with two compromises, the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and now the Compromise of 1850. He offered several plans for new laws to help balance the power. First, California would be admitted as a free state. Second, people would not be allowed to sell slaves in Washington, D.C. These laws would make Northerners happy. At the same time, though, people in Utah and New Mexico would be allowed to decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery in their territories. In addition, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Law. Northern officials would have to help Southerners capture runaway slaves. These two laws were aimed at pleasing Southerners. So the Compromise of 1850 was passed into law in September of that year. Even though Senator Clay and the other leaders worked to try and find a way to solve the differences between the country they weren't successful. Many people in both parts of the country were more upset than ever. Southerners thought the North was trying to destroy slavery and their whole entire way of life. Northerners thought the South would never be happy until slavery had spread to every state. Soon, it became clear that the differences between the two groups were going to be difficult to overcome peacefully. So the compromises for a good couple of years, almost 30 years, worked. But now we're getting to the end of the compromising with the KansasNebraska Act. So the Compromise of 1850 did very little to bring peace to the nation. Instead, the compromise seemed to fuel the fire. This fire began to grow stronger when the territories of Kansas and Nebraska wanted to become states. Both territories were north of that Missouri boundary. According to law then, both new states would be free from slavery. However, in 1854, a senator from Illinois named Stephen Douglas suggested a troubling plan. He believed the people in Kansas and Nebraska should be allowed to decide for themselves if they wanted to allow slavery. Congress, which is our federal government agreed with Douglas, and the KansasNebraska Act became law. Suddenly, the Southern Territory of Kansas became a battleground over states' rights and slavery. People who supported or approved of slavery rushed to Kansas. People who opposed or were against slavery also rushed there to voice their beliefs. Can you see the problem that's coming here? Both groups wanted to vote in the election that would make the final slavery decision. The people argued with both words and weapons. So now we're getting violent, okay? On election day, voters in Kansas approved a constitution that allowed slavery. The anti-slavery leaders believed the election had not been fair. Over 6,000 people had voted, but Kansas had only 3,000 voters. So that doesn't make sense. Something doesn't add up. It was clear that some people who did not really live in Kansas had voted. So that's not really fair, right? The Free Soilers, or people who did not support slavery, set up their own political party in protest. People on both sides of the issue became violent. There was fighting throughout the spring and summer of 1856. The issue was finally resolved or settled when another election was held. In January 1861, Kansas was added as a free state. Neither the South nor the North was satisfied with this compromise. The nation was now headed toward a war where one side will be pitted against the other. So all of this is leading up to the Civil War. So these compromises were aimed at resolving some of these issues so it wouldn't come to war. What we're seeing that the compromises only worked for a small amount of time, and now eventually people on both sides are fed up, okay? So real quick before we go, I want to talk about the Underground Railroad for a minute, okay? So many Southerners felt that slavery was a necessary part of life. It was part of their life and part of their economy. If they didn't have slaves to work the plantations, they would have to work them themselves. They wouldn't be able to put out as much product, okay? Plantation owners used slaves to run their large farms. On the other side, many Northerners believed slavery was wrong. Northern abolitionists felt very strongly that all slavery should be abolished or end forever. Some of those against slavery got together and organized the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad wasn't a real railroad, and it wasn't underneath the ground. Instead, it was a name for a system of people and homes that secretly helped slaves escape to free states. Homes were known as stations. At each station, there were people or conductors to help the slaves hide and bring them on to their next destination. They gave slaves food, clothing, and a place to sleep. When it was safe, the conductors helped the slaves find their way to the next station. Many slaves traveled from station to station until they felt they were safe. The Fugitive Slave Act allowed runaway slaves to be tracked into northern states. Some of the slaves had to travel all the way to Canada before they felt they were free from slavery forever. Okay? Most Northerners were not part of the Underground Railroad, but many Southerners became distrustful of them. Each group felt the other's ideas about slavery were wrong. Okay, so the big issue of the Civil War was slavery. I mean, there were many other issues, but this was the big hothead issue that brought both sides to war. Okay, so in our next video, we're going to talk about the Civil War and the causes of the Civil War besides slavery, because there were other ones. And we're going to get into the beginnings of the Civil War on Thursday in your second video of the week. So I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. It should be a lot of new information for you. This week, I'm not going to hold up a set of questions because you are going to be, if you scroll down in the description of the video, I attached a link, and the link will take you to a worksheet where it's going to ask you to describe the 3 different compromises and 2 facts about each. So you can show me your answers either by showing them up in the video in our academic Zoom meetings, and that would be Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. to get credit, or you can email me your answers at lindsay.cordello@psacademyarizona.com. Most of you already have my email, so you can send that to me. So there's 2 ways. You can show me your answers or email them to me, okay? So scroll down, click on the link, it should take you to the worksheet, okay? So I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and we will see you at our next Zoom meeting. Bye, guys.